Every time someone told me to go back to where I came from, a piece of me felt lost, disoriented. Was this not my home too?
I was always labeled angry whenever I voiced out against racial comments.
The colors of racism, psychological effects and coping strategies. The above testimonials are but brief windows into the profound psychological impacts of racism, a pervasive, often insidious, force that countless individuals grapple with daily. Racism, in its many forms, has persistently blemished the tapestry of societies worldwide, but its external manifestations are just the tip of the iceberg. Beneath the surface lies a much deeper, often unspoken trauma. The toll on mental health. In the US alone, over 40% of adults from ethnic and racial minority groups report experiencing racial discrimination. This isn't a mere inconvenience. For many, it's a recurring trauma that can trigger a plethora of psychological repercussions. Historically, societies have viewed racism through a primarily socio-political lens. Understanding these is critical not just for the victims, but also for educators, families, and societies at large. After all, it isn't just a personal tragedy, it's a societal failing. The conversation around racism isn't monolithic. It's a multifaceted issue, intertwined with nuances and intricacies, and its psychological effects can be just as varied. Some may experience anxiety or depression. It is our collective responsibility to not only acknowledge the psychological ramifications of racism, but also to combat them. Educating ourselves is the first step. James Baldwin, the brilliant African-American writer and activist, once remarked, "To be a Negro in this country and to be relatively conscious is to be in a rage almost all the time." Baldwin's life, painted with both the vibrancy of his genius and the shadows of racial prejudice, offers a profound insight into the nexus between racism and psychological health. In school, Baldwin's teachers couldn't ignore his precocious talent for writing. However, the undercurrents of racism were evident. During a meeting with his school's principal, Baldwin was advised to consider a career in carpentry, because it was a good profession for a young colored boy. But Baldwin, driven by his passion and supported by a few mentors, chose to chase his literary dreams. His move to Paris in the 1940s was not merely a literary expedition, but also an escape from the stifling racial prejudices of the US. Yet, distance did not bring detachment. The racial struggles of his homeland continued to weigh heavily on his psyche, evident in his writings. Baldwin once confessed that the constant racial tension made him feel perpetually unsafe, a sentiment echoed by many black individuals. The FBI took an unhealthy interest in Baldwin, amassing a 1,884-page file on him. This surveillance wasn't just an invasion of privacy. It was a psychological vice, indicative of the state's perception of Baldwin as a threat, due to his candid discussions on race. James Baldwin's life, while exceptional in its accomplishments, bears the indelible marks of racism's psychological effects. His resilience and courage offer hope, but his struggles underscore the urgency of addressing racism's mental toll.
Disclaimer. This video is intended for educational purposes only, and is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Let's now continue our journey to better understand mental health.
Following the echoes of individuals like James Baldwin, whose lived experiences have left indelible marks on the annals of history, numerous academic studies have sought to understand the intricate relationship between racism and psychological health. One pivotal study that stands out is the 2015 Journal of Counseling Psychology report, which synthesized over 300 studies to assess the impact of racism on the mental health of people of color. The findings were profound and, unfortunately, predictable. Experiences of racial discrimination correlated with greater symptoms of depression, anxiety, and distress. Another noteworthy study is the 2016 American Journal of Public Health Research, which explored the physiological impact of racism. The study highlighted that experiences of racial discrimination were linked to both mental health disorders and chronic physiological conditions, including heart disease. However, where we have a plethora of studies and statistics elucidating the ill effects of racism, we confront a significant gap in our understanding of its intricacies. For instance, while it's evident that racism negatively impacts psychological health, we still lack comprehensive studies on how various factors, like age, socioeconomic status, or intersectionality, affect the intensity of this impact. The Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health in 2019 drew attention to this gap. While acknowledging the existing body of research, they pointed out a dearth of studies focusing on the resilience and coping mechanisms employed by racial and ethnic minorities. Another gap lies in dissecting the combined effects of systemic racism and individual experiences. While numerous studies focus on personal racial encounters, fewer dive deep into how systemic barriers, such as limited access to quality healthcare or housing, amplify the psychological strain. The ramifications of racism on the psyche are diverse and profound. The psychological health impacts may result in depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD, and low self-esteem. The act of diagnosing psychological distress due to racism is a sensitive endeavor, chiefly because the symptoms might overlap with those of many common mental health disorders. A proper diagnosis involves clinical interviews, standardized assessments tools like the Racial and Ethnic Microaggression Scale or REMS, and observational methods. Navigating the tumultuous waves of racism's psychological effects requires a multifaceted approach. As mental health professionals dive deeper into this realm, a variety of effective treatment modalities have emerged such as 1. Behavior therapy. As to cognitive behavioral therapy or CBT, and group therapy. Behavioral therapy is pivotal in helping individuals recognize, cope, and react differently to triggers stemming from racial discrimination. 2. Medications. While no medication specifically targets the psychological distress from racism, some prescribed medication, as to stimulant and non-stimulant, can alleviate associated symptoms like anxiety or depression. This can be considered as a part of a broader therapeutic plan as suggested by professionals. 3. Cultural and racial affirmation. Culturally tailored interventions such as cultural immersion and narrative therapy have proven effective in counteracting the negative impacts of racism. 4. Advocacy and social support. Encouraging affected individuals to engage in activism and advocacy can transform feelings of helplessness into empowerment. While no single treatment fits all, the fusion of personal therapy, community engagement, and systemic interventions can craft a roadmap to healing. Yet, armed with knowledge, empathy, and strategic interventions, society can pave the way for genuine healing and inclusive understanding. Here are some recommendations. 1. Comprehensive mental health education. Mental health curriculums at schools and colleges should embed modules focusing specifically on racial trauma. 2. Prioritize cultural competency training. Mental health professionals need robust training to grasp the intricate nuances of racial trauma. 3. Community building. Communities play a pivotal role in buffering against racial trauma. Initiatives that promote intercultural dialogue and collaboration, like the United in Diversity campaign launched by the United Nations in 2022, can fortify community bonds. 4. Public awareness campaigns. There's an urgent need to educate the broader public on the psychological consequences of racism. Navigating the treacherous terrains of racism's psychological effects isn't a solitary journey. It's a collective effort, demanding empathy, understanding, and actionable change from each societal stratum. To every individual grappling with racial trauma, remember, your pain is valid, but it doesn't define you. With the right resources, community support, and internal resilience, you too can stand up, not just for yourself but for a world where every hue is valued equally.